How does your faith increase when you know you've heard from God or when you know what He said is about to happen? Like there's so much in that we can ask ourselves and kind of examine ourselves in. And today, as we continue in the book of Genesis, we're now in chapter 41, and this is where Pharaoh has the dream and Joseph comes to interpret it. And I got a lot of questions that we can ask ourselves in this one. So come on in and join me. Hey y'all, I'm Kayla. Welcome back to His Word, My Walk. Can you believe it? We're in chapter 41 of Genesis, like literally a book of the Bible that's 50 chapters long, and we are cruising and we're like less than 10 chapters to go. Okay, so let's continue on because this is kind of a long chapter. We're continuing on in Genesis. We're now in chapter 41, and we actually already read verse 1 yesterday, 2 full years later. 2 full years later, remember, Joseph just interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, which didn't turn out so well for him. And then the cupbearer doesn't bring up Joseph, doesn't say oh yeah, this is the guy. 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. The Nile River. Again, this is just that 2 full years later. So first of all, as we're reading the Bible, we've got to understand this little skip between paragraphs is 2 years of time. 2 years of conversations we don't know. 2 years of Joseph in the prison that we don't know what that was like. 2 years of him being the leader over the prison and we don't know what that was like. 2 years of Joseph in his mind. 2 years of Joseph's conversations with God that we don't hear and that we don't know. All right, so I want us to understand that these are real people, but also make sure we know context of timeline. I think so often that's one of the things we miss when we read the Bible because we just read through it so fast. 2 full years later, all right? Think of what 2 years of time is like. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. 7 of them. 7 of them. Remember, it makes me think already, right? Obviously we're going to keep reading, but the last one was 3 and 3, and Joseph was in 3 days, right? So now there's this emphasis. There are 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. I mean, we can picture that in our mind, right? We can picture the cows. For some reason, I'm picturing old milk commercials from when I was a kid. 7 healthy big cows, 7 scrawny ones come up on the bank too. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. Okay, this makes me also think of I was going to say when I was a kid, but it happens now. Are you that person that you have dreams and you're oh my gosh, I was in my high school cafeteria, but I was also where I lived in college. And at the same time, I was with one of my adulthood friends, but then we were driving the car that I had when I was 16. Am I the only one that has dreams? I honestly don't remember my dreams very often. But when I do, it's how do all of these situations of my life go together, But how about this? Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy fat cows. First of all, do cows eat cows? The fact that Pharaoh, well, we're not there yet, but the fact that Pharaoh even wants someone to interpret this dream, the fact that he thinks this dream means something. Gosh, I've had dreams that sound so silly. So then there was these skinny cows and they came and ate the fat cows. And I'd be what a weird night, and just go on with my life. Oh, remember the other day when I was sharing how in the studies and in the commentaries, how it was saying how often God speaks in dreams? Am I just not listening to certain things, whether it's in dreams or not? This is having me examine myself already. Are there things that the Lord is trying to communicate to me and it just sounds so ridiculous that I just brush it off as a weird thought? Well, at this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up, but he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Okay, can you picture that? 7 heads of grain, one single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. The east wind. Where's the east wind come from? As we go on, there's like a nor'easter is like a big, huge storm that Paul goes through. But the east wind, it just like, that's got to give us some understanding of even the landscape there. And like an east wind, was that more powerful than the rest? Verse 7, and these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. Okay, maybe at that point, I would be like, okay, is this something? Like I kind of had the same dream twice. 2 different things, but it was kind of the same dream twice. How many times does God repeat himself to me in different ways until I finally get it or until I finally pay attention? That's how awesome our God is. And the fact that, we're not even there yet, but like God is speaking in a dream to Pharaoh and Joseph's going to come in. Like God is so strategic and so purposeful and he loves us so much and he's gracious. Gosh, that he repeats himself in a different way to understand. You know, how cool is that? To even think about how God speaks to us in our lives. And it's not just, this is a silly example, but it's not just like clean your room, clean your room, clean your room. It's like, I'm trying to think of an example, like clean your room. But then the next time it's like a different way to even say that, you know? That might have been a horrible example, but I feel like you know what I'm trying to say here. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. This is Pharaoh, the king of all of Egypt. And he's sending for the magicians and the wise men. I imagine they want to come through for Pharaoh, right? Because that would be very good for their own marketing, very good for their own life. Not one of them could tell him what they meant. As in they all said like, I have no idea. Or as in some of them tried and he was like, that can't be it. I don't know. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I have been reminded of my failure. You know, like I imagine Joseph like reading this back. Like, really, this is what he said? Today I have been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard, Potiphar, remember? We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. There's something in there that stood out to me in such a silly way, but such a curious way. Where did it go? Verse 10. Some time ago you were angry. Remember chapter 40? Chapter 40 started like this. Sometime later, and then it used the same phrase again, like later sometime or sometime after some time had passed. And now this one says some time ago. Well, we know based on verse 1 that it's at least 2 years now. Sometime in his context means 2 years. Did those mean that? I don't know for sure, right? But it just made me curious because I remember questioning, what does some time mean in the previous chapter? And now, again, he uses the phrase some time ago, and we had just read in verse 1, 2 full years. That may not be correct. However, I just think it's so cool that there are things that can stand out to us when we read God's word, and then we remember them the next day and we read it again and we're like, wait a minute, do I have any further understanding to what was written in the previous chapter? You know? Okay. So he tells him the story. Hey, we had these dreams. Remember that time you threw us in jail? Hey, this guy interpreted our dreams. And like they were right. It was within 3 days. And remember, hey, look at me. I'm fully restored. And the baker, yeah, he was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Okay, so he was brought from the prison. I think sometimes we still don't realize and recognize Joseph was a prisoner. So then to come before Pharaoh after he shaved and changed his clothes. First, how did they shave back then? But after he shaved and changed his clothes, how old is Joseph at this time? We're about to hear another update, but are you in your mind with how old Joseph is? He's not in his 50s. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. I wonder how that went. Who went and got him and said, hey, you're going to appear before Pharaoh. The Pharaoh wants to talk to you. Here, we have clothes for you to put on. Shower up, shave, change your clothes so that we can present you before Pharaoh. And I wonder if the chief, maybe we're going to get to there, but if the cupbearer was like, oh, hi, sorry about that. Forgot about you, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Similar to what he said to them before, right? It's not my business. It's God's business to interpret the dreams. Tell me what it is. God's business. Joseph is very clear. He could have actually come in here right now as that prisoner and be like, yeah, I got this. I shouldn't be in prison. Let me show you what I can do. Let me show you the skills that I have. Even let me show you the gift that God gave me. Let me show you the talent that God gave me, what God is using me to do. Joseph doesn't speak like that. Oh, we can examine ourselves in so much of just how Joseph acts. With Joseph as our example in this. It's beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. So Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. In my dream, he said, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River, and I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after them. I've never seen such sorry-looking animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the 7 fat cows, but afterward, you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. There's an extra detail that we didn't hear before. See, as I was reading that, I was like, oh, he's telling it all verbatim. No, there's an extra detail that we didn't know before. An extra detail. It's making me wonder, if there's something I truly want to happen and I believe the person in front of me can help me with it, am I willing to put it all out there? I mean, it's probably embarrassing enough to share the dream, right? But he gave extra details. He gave all the details. And Joseph still said, God can tell you what it means. And now he's just laying it all out there. But afterward, you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed up the 7 healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. Wait a minute, why is he not responding to both? Why doesn't he say, both of your dreams mean the same? How come he's speaking to Pharaoh in third person? Curious, right? Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he's about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. I don't know if I ever thought about this before, but because it's the east wind, is the famine, does something in the east have to do with the famine? I never really thought about that before. That would take that'll take some serious curiosity digging. In all the times I literally have read this chapter many times in the last week and today and month, I've never thought about that. Does the east wind have a significance? Is it something from the east coming and have to do with anything in the famine? This will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he's about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterward, there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. I want to just slow that down a little bit. This will happen just as I have described it. Okay, well, the previous one, right, when he was like, hey, this will happen as I described it. I don't know if he said that to the cupbearer and the baker, but it was on a 3-day time frame. And then in 3 days, they were like, he was right. This is a 7-year time frame because for the first 7 years, they're supposed to have all this prosperity. Okay, maybe they would think yeah, we're doing well. We have all this prosperity. We caused this. We did all of this. Would they know that Joseph's interpretation was true before that 7 years was up? Would there be a countdown oh my gosh, 6 years to go, 5 years to go, 6 months to go, 2 months to go, 1 month to go? Is Joseph right or not? But also that's 7 years. Oh, we got to keep reading. Okay, so verse 31, the famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. Have you ever felt like that? The bad time is so severe that even the memory of the good times. Oh, shoot. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. What does 1/5 have to do with anything? That's 20%. Is that different than did Pharaoh already collect some? I'm telling you, do some research, look into some commentaries, understand the context. Was there already a tenth, a tithe, something in place there? But now 1/5, now 20%. Is this an increase in the taxes? Get curious. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. One man. I wonder if as Joseph's saying this, if he's thinking that it should be him. Or if he's just truly just speaking what the Lord, if he's truly speaking what the Lord's telling him to speak. And then I examine myself. Am I willing to just share what I believe the Lord is asking me to share? Or am I always trying to put my name out there? Make it more about me. See if they want me on the up and up. Is Joseph really telling Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt? Is Joseph's mind at all focused on he should be the guy at this time? Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. There's a serious lesson in there about saving, about budgeting, about putting things away. But it also makes me think what is it that they're putting away? Is it grain? What other kind of food would it be? Because it would have to be able to be held there for 7 years. And maybe even 14 years, probably more 7, because I'm sure they would have that can rotation system, we'll take the first ones first. It's just making, I'm curious, I wonder about all these things. But what were Pharaoh's storehouses like, right? Bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses, store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. Not will destroy all the people, will destroy the land. What's that phrase, destroy the land, mean? Does that mean all the people will die too? Does that mean there just won't be anything on the land and we'll all just, what does that mean? That otherwise this famine will destroy the land? Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. Joseph's suggestions. They didn't say God's words. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? So obviously filled with the Spirit of God. Didn't Potiphar say something just like that a couple chapters ago? In verse 39, he recognized something about he realized right there, verse 39, or chapter 39, verse 3. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. Potiphar realized the Lord was with Joseph. And now, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? What's Pharaoh's understanding of God? What's Pharaoh's belief in God? Pharaoh is the king of Egypt. What's his reverence of God? What's his view of God? And for him to say, we want to find someone like this, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God. Is it just because he told him the dream? Right? Does Pharaoh have anything, any understanding of what's been happening for the last however many years that Joseph's been in prison there? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. This is like a split-second decision. Pharaoh experienced God and the truth of God's word through Joseph and immediately made a decision. How fast am I willing to make decisions when I hear God's word and when I hear God's voice and when I feel convicted by the Lord or when I see a direction moving forward? Oh, he immediately made a decision. Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. This is in Egypt. Remember, Joseph is a Hebrew boy, sold into slavery to the Egyptians. Only I, sitting on the throne, will have a rank higher than yours. I wonder what everyone else in the room is thinking about. Or if they're all in agreement, yeah, this is the guy. We will bow down, or bow out, or however that goes. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Okay, we read this and we know the story sometimes, but actually, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. This is Joseph who knows how long this took, a couple hours maybe? A couple hours ago was in prison. Had to shave, shower up, get other clothes given to him to even be presentable to be in front of the king, in front of Pharaoh. I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. So am I going back to my why can't I think of it? Cell? Do I live here now? How did this transition actually happen? Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. What would be the significance of those things? Of Pharaoh's signet ring, but also the gold chain and the fine linen clothing. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. When God moves, God moves. And God can move fast. And God moved fast in Joseph's life. But did he? Yes, right? We read this and we're like, oh my gosh, this happened so fast. Okay, well, let's also let's also not forget the times at home, what his brothers did to him, being sold into slavery, being in prison. Let's not forget the faithfulness of Joseph through all of that too. Because sometimes we need to look at our own lives, but more importantly, sometimes I think the people around us, when we see someone else, God steps in and immediately, right? God will do it immediately. Okay, well, God's been doing immediatelys. and we got to work at it. And there's time and there's growth. Like, I believe that Joseph must have learned a bunch of things while he was in prison, while he was ruling over people, right? He learned how not to talk to people when it came to his brothers sometimes, but he also learned, right? He learned how to flee from Potiphar's wife. He also learned how to serve other prisoners, how to be ruler over other prisoners. And now, see how it's all kind of training? But we sometimes look at it as like, God immediately put him in charge and he was immediately second in command. Okay, well, God was with him in everything else. This isn't where, oh boy, this chapter right here, so far, there's nothing that has said the word success. Whereas the chapter about Joseph being in prison, God mentioned how successful Joseph was. I've never thought of that, but how cool is that? Right? Remember, we focused on that a couple days ago. How many times God said, like, I'm with you. I'm with you. You will be successful. The Lord has caused him to be successful. Now this chapter that we, in our worldly eyes, would be like, now he did it. He made it. He's arrived. There's nothing that says success. God didn't say success in any of this yet. That's kind of cool to like go to my journal about a little bit more. Okay, where are we? Verse 44. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. Did you know that? Did you know that? Joseph, a.k.a. Zaphenath-Paneah. He also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Pharoah, which I think is funny because it makes me think Potiphar, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. Do we know any of those names? The priest of On. Is On mentioned anywhere else in the Bible? Anything that we know about that? Joseph recognized... Nope, wrong chapter. Geez, I've been like skipping to the wrong column in my Bible. Here we go. She was the daughter of Pharoah, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old. How old was he when he showed up and his brothers threw him in the cistern and all of that? Do you remember? He was 17. So it's been 13 years since then. See how we like read this and we're like, yeah, it happened immediately from the pit to the palace. No, 13 years. 13 years, all right? As predicted, for 7 years, the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grains from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. During this time, before the first of the famine years, okay, so that one paragraph is 7 years of time. That one paragraph is 7 years of time. During this time, before the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph and his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. See, we like to hear the troubles part. God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. Does that mean like, and everything that the people in my father's family did to me? Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief. What kind of grief? What was Joseph grieving? And for how long was he grieving? Right? At last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end. The 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine also struck all the surrounding countries, but throughout Egypt, there was plenty of food. I wonder if all the surrounding countries, I wonder if any of their kings had dreams. I don't know. Eventually, however, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. And when the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. So with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and distributed grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe through the land of Egypt. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. What is world at that point in time? How far is there the concept of world at that point in time? But how cool is this, right? So Joseph had the idea, and so they tax the people, right? 1/5 of your crops come into the storehouse so that you'll have enough food during these famine years. And then hear this. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. To buy grain. Look, we got enough stored up. People are now coming to pay for us. This happens in the world now. Remember the whole toilet paper thing? And now you can jack up the prices and all of this. This is happening there with Joseph in charge. That was actually really cool. I didn't have, this is actually really funny, and I will share this. As I was looking beforehand, chapter 41 in my journal, this is all I have for chapter 41, this little piece here. So I was like, oh, God, I don't have a whole lot to share with everyone. What? There was so much freshness in that chapter today. It makes me want to go back and when I edit, but then rewatch this one and open my journal in a fresh journal, and go through this chapter again. Because I feel like there was a lot that I could examine myself in this chapter too. Genesis 41. Again, you can always grab this workbook. It's always going to be there for you. There are the questions. This was a long chapter, but these questions are good. I'll share one of them with you. Again, in every chapter, there are 2 questions to help you dig into yourself. And then obviously the Walk It Out challenge I always share. But how about this one? How much do I desire to figure out my dreams, my thoughts, my visions? Does it impact my faith in God in any way, positive or negative? Am I often seeking answers? Let's dig into ourselves a little bit. How much do I desire to figure out my dreams or my thoughts or my visions? Does it impact my faith in God in any way, positive or negative? Am I often seeking answers? As in going to other things to try to figure out answers. Why am I the way I am? Why am I thinking like this? Why am I feeling like this month? Does it have to do with where the moon is? Does it have to do with, am I always seeking answers? Does it impact my faith in any way? And now here's your Walk It Out challenge. This one's actually cool too. Today, discover the meaning of your name. Maybe you know it. Maybe you've heard stories. Maybe you were simply named after a grandparent or a friend. What does your name mean? What about in different languages? Can you see any similarities in your personality and the meaning of your name? I think it's super interesting when people will tell me, because obviously my name is spelled in a very unique way. When people will tell me your name means this, your name means this. Y'all, I was named after a dog. And the kids couldn't, it was an Inuit dog name. And the kids couldn't pronounce the dog's name and called it Kayla. So there's that. But I have seen, right? First of all, I can never find keychains or mugs or anything with my name spelled correctly, but I have seen things and broken down in Hebrew, what my name means. And it's really cool to see that. And just see God's sovereignty in all of that too. But yeah, I want you to do some digging, do some research, even in other languages. What does your name mean? All right. Let me pray over you before we go. God, I thank you. Oh, I thank you for this chapter of your word and just the freshness that you have brought. Holy Spirit, thank you for sitting right here with us through the screens, through technology, through microphones. I thank you for being present in all of our homes, in our cars, on our jobs, wherever we are right now. I thank you for your presence, that we can be studying your word and spending time with you together around the world. God, I pray over the one watching right now. I pray that as they discover the meaning of their name, that you will be glorified, that there will be an awe of who you are, of your favor, of your faithfulness, of your love, of your sovereignty in it all. God, I thank you for how purposeful you are. I thank you. And God, I just pray that as we go, that we don't question, But that when we do even question God, that it's actually moments of elevating our faith and knowing and seeing how you are working and how you've been working, even in our past, even in the hard times, even in the struggles, that we don't just want something to happen immediately, but when it does happen, that we can actually recognize you in every step of the journey, which means you are right here, right now with us in this step of the journey too. God, I thank you for who you are and your faithfulness and your love in Jesus' name. Amen. Oh my gosh, what an awesome chapter. But remember Joseph's brothers that sold him into the slavery there? They're coming back. Are they going to recognize him? Is he going to recognize them? Are they actually going to bow down like Joseph's dream that he had, that he told them about, actually said? Let's keep going.